Have you ever felt that spine-tingling sensation when entering an old house? That feeling that something is watching you from the shadows? Tonight's story will take you deep into the heart of one of America's most mysterious mansions, where the line between the living and the dead blurs with each passing night. If you've experienced anything supernatural, you'll want to share your story in the comments below. And if this tale keeps you up tonight, wondering about the shadows in your own home, be sure to subscribe for more haunting narratives that explore the unexplained corners of our world. Now, dim your lights, get comfortable, and prepare to enter Blackwood Manor. The story begins now. Part 1. The Invitation. I never believed in ghosts. Not until Blackwood Manor consumed 3 months of my life, leaving me forever changed. My name is Alex Parker, a historical preservation consultant from Boston specializing in 19th century architecture. When the email arrived last October requesting my services to evaluate Blackwood Manor in Shadowvale, Massachusetts, I thought it was just another routine assignment. The message came from Dr. Eleanor Winters of the Shadowvale Historical Society. A quick search revealed Blackwood Manor was a sprawling Victorian estate built in 1874 by railroad magnate William Blackwood. The property had remained unoccupied for nearly 30 years following a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Fascinating historically, but nothing alarming. 3 days later, I was driving through dense Massachusetts forests as autumn leaves spiraled down around my Jeep. The GPS directed me deeper into increasingly remote countryside until the paved road gave way to gravel. "You have arrived at your destination," announced the robotic voice as I rounded a final bend. I hit the brakes, my breath catching in my throat. There it stood, Blackwood Manor, silhouetted against the setting sun. 3 stories of weathered grandeur with a central tower that pierced the darkening sky. Gothic spires and elaborate woodwork decorated its imposing facade. Even in its neglected state, the manor commanded respect. And something else. An inexplicable sense of dread crept up my spine as I stared at the darkened windows that seemed to stare back at me. Dr. Eleanor Winters greeted me at the door, a slender woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and wire-rimmed glasses. She led me through the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase and massive crystal chandelier coated in decades of dust. "The Historical Society is quite eager for your assessment," Dr. Winters said. "The manor has been in legal limbo since the last Blackwood heir disappeared in 1994. The town recently acquired the property, and we're hoping to restore it as a historical landmark and museum." After showing me to the old caretaker's quarters, a modestly furnished apartment that would be my home during the assessment, Dr. Winters departed, leaving me alone as twilight settled over the Massachusetts countryside. I spent the evening exploring the ground floor, the grand dining room, the library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a music room with a dust-covered piano. Everything was remarkably preserved, as if the occupants had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. As daylight faded, I switched on my flashlight and continued exploring. The kitchen was massive, with an old cast-iron stove and a walk-in pantry still stocked with ancient preserves in glass jars. A door near the pantry led to a cellar, but the key wouldn't turn. One of the sealed areas Dr. Winters had mentioned, I supposed. I made my way back to the grand staircase. As I placed my foot on the first step, a distinct creak echoed from above me, like the sound of a floorboard under pressure. I froze, listening. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps overhead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "Is someone there?" Silence greeted me. Then, faintly, came the sound of a door closing. I told myself it was just the house settling as I ascended the staircase, but my heart pounded in my chest, and my palms grew damp around the flashlight. The second floor contained family bedrooms frozen in time. In one room that had clearly belonged to a woman, I found a silver-backed hairbrush with strands of long, dark hair still tangled in its bristles. I reached out to touch it. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of my face, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The door behind me slammed shut with such force that dust rained down from the ceiling. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. The doorknob rattled violently, then stopped. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the disturbance ceased. When I finally returned to my quarters after midnight, I transferred my photos to my laptop and began organizing my notes. As I was about to turn in for the night, my laptop screen flickered. At the same moment, I heard a faint scratching sound from the wall behind me. I turned slowly. On the previously blank wall, something impossible was happening. Words were appearing, as if being carved by an invisible hand. Get out while you still can. Part 2. The Descent. Sleep did not come easily that night. When I woke at dawn, the wall was completely blank. No trace of the warning that had appeared the night before. Had I imagined it? After a morning exploring the third floor's servants' quarters and storage rooms, I found a leather-bound journal in an old trunk. The first page bore an inscription. Property of Catherine Blackwood, 1923. Catherine's elegant handwriting detailed her life as William Blackwood's granddaughter. Her early entries were mundane, but as I turned the pages, the tone darkened. The noises in the walls have started again, read an entry from June 1924. Father insists it's just rats, but I know better. Something is trying to get out. July 1924. Mary Beth, one of our maids, quit today after claiming she saw a child in the hallway mirror who wasn't there when she turned around. That makes 3 staff members we've lost this month alone. The entries continued, growing increasingly disturbed. Catherine wrote of cold spots, objects moving on their own, and whispered conversations heard through the walls. She began to suspect that her grandfather had done something terrible during the construction of the manor. The final entry, dated November 17, 1924, sent chills down my spine. I found the hidden door in the library. Tonight, I'll discover what grandfather was hiding in the walls. If anything happens to me, let it be known that the Blackwood fortune was built on blood, and this house demands payment still. That was the last entry. What had happened to Catherine Blackwood? When Dr. Winters arrived with lunch, I casually brought up my discovery. I found a journal belonging to Catherine Blackwood. She mentioned something about a hidden door in the library. Do you know anything about that? Dr. Winters paused, her sandwich halfway to her mouth. Catherine Blackwood? I'm not familiar with that name. Her tone was casual, but I noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. After Dr. Winters left, I headed straight for the library to search for the hidden door Catherine had mentioned. Hours passed with no success until suddenly the room grew cold. So cold I could see my breath. Books began to fly from the shelves as if thrown by invisible hands, landing in a pile that formed a clear arrow pointing toward the north wall. The north wall appeared solid, lined with bookshelves like all the others. But the shelf at the tip of the book arrow contained volumes of identical height and binding, too perfectly uniform. I discovered a small metal plate with a keyhole on the edge of the shelf. Remembering the portrait of William Blackwood in the foyer, I examined it closely. The painting showed a watch chain with a distinctive key. I found a hidden drawer in the frame containing that very key. Back in the library, I inserted the key into the hidden lock. With a soft click, the entire bookshelf swung inward, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Cold, stale air rushed out, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. The stone staircase spiraled downward for 67 steps before reaching a narrow corridor. My flashlight revealed a small metal plaque embedded in the wall. Project Threshold. Authorized personnel only. U.S. Department of Defense, 1952. What was a Department of Defense project doing underneath a private residence? The corridor ended at a heavy metal door with a wheel lock. Beyond lay a large circular chamber. The floor was covered in intricate symbols carved into the concrete. Concentric circles filled with mathematical equations and astronomical symbols. At the center was a perfect circle of dark, stained concrete about 10 feet in diameter. Modern equipment lined the walls, rusted control panels, broken monitors, tangles of cables. This wasn't Victorian-era construction. This was mid-20th century technology. A mural on the far wall depicted William Blackwood standing before this very chamber. But instead of the empty circle at the center, the painting showed a swirling vortex of darkness, from which emerged shadowy, elongated figures with too many limbs and eyes that glowed an unnatural blue. Beneath the mural, a plaque read, "In appreciation of the Blackwood family's continued cooperation, the threshold remains secure." As these questions raced through my mind, a low hum began to emanate from the center of the room. The circle of stained concrete began to vibrate. The temperature plummeted, and my flashlight flickered before going out completely. In the sudden darkness, I sensed movement from the circle, a shifting, a stirring, as if something long dormant was awakening. And then came the whispers, dozens of overlapping voices speaking words I couldn't understand. I fumbled for my phone, activating its flashlight. In its weak blue glow, I saw something impossible. The stained circle had become a pool of swirling darkness, and something was rising from its depths. I ran, stumbling back down the corridor, scrambling up the stone staircase. I burst through the hidden door into the library, slammed it shut, and twisted the key in the lock with shaking hands. Only then did I realize I wasn't alone. Dr. Eleanor Winters stood by the library entrance, her expression unreadable. "So," she said quietly, "you found it." Part 3. The truth. What is that place? I demanded, still catching my breath. "What's down there?" Dr. Winters sighed. "You should sit down, Mr. Parker. This is a longer conversation than I anticipated having." She poured 2 glasses of bourbon before speaking. "What do you know about Shadowvale's history?" "Not much," I admitted. "Small town, founded in the 1700s. Railroad came through in the 1860s. The Native Americans who lived in this region avoided this valley. They called it the place where shadows walk. Their legends spoke of a thin spot between worlds, a doorway that should never be opened." She took another sip. "In 1873, William Blackwood arrived. During what was supposed to be a one-night stay, he experienced what he later described as a visitation. Beings from somewhere else showed him visions of technological marvels decades ahead of their time. Innovations that would make him unimaginably wealthy. All they wanted in exchange was access to our world." "Are you telling me William Blackwood made some kind of deal with entities from another dimension?" I asked incredulously. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. He built this house directly over the thinnest point between our world and theirs, what would later be called the threshold. The entire manor was designed as a containment structure, with certain architectural elements serving as a kind of lock. But the Department of Defense plaque, that was dated 1952. During World War II, the government became aware of the threshold. The Blackwood family struck a deal. The government could study the threshold if they helped maintain the containment structure. Project Threshold ran from 1947 to 1964. Some of our most advanced technologies came from studying what occasionally emerged. But there were incidents. In 1964, something came through that killed an entire research team before it could be contained. The project was officially shut down. And the Historical Society, is that even real? Oh, it's real. Just not what you think it is. We're more of a custodial organization. Keepers of the threshold. For generations, certain families in Shadowvale have taken on this responsibility. So, why bring me here? Why risk exposing all this? Because the containment is failing, Mr. Parker. The architectural elements that keep the threshold stable are deteriorating. We needed someone with your expertise to help us understand how to repair them without dismantling the entire structure. As if punctuating her statement, the house shuddered around us. Books trembled on their shelves, and dust rained down from the ceiling. From somewhere deep below came a low, reverberating groan. "What about Catherine Blackwood?" I asked. Catherine was problematic. Unlike the rest of her family, she wasn't content to benefit from the arrangement without questioning its source. When she discovered the threshold, she threatened to expose everything. She disappeared shortly afterward. Another tremor shook the house, stronger than the first. A framed map fell from the wall and shattered. "We don't have much time," Dr. Winters said urgently. "Will you help us?" Before I could answer, the lights flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard a wet, slithering noise coming from behind the hidden door. The temperature plummeted until I could see my breath. "They're coming," Dr. Winters whispered. "The containment is breached." The hidden door began to rattle, the key turning in the lock of its own accord. Dr. Winters grabbed my arm. "We need to get to the tower. It's the only place with additional protections." We ran from the library just as the hidden door burst open. I caught a glimpse of writhing darkness spilling out like black smoke, forming shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Dr. Winters led me through a maze of corridors and up into the tower I'd seen from outside. The tower room was circular, with strange symbols carved into the wooden floor and painted on the ceiling. From a cabinet, she withdrew a leather pouch and began sprinkling some kind of powder along the threshold of the door. "Salt and iron filings. It won't hold them for long." She moved to a small pedestal supporting what looked like an antique radio. This was installed during Project Threshold, a way to monitor energy emanating from below. It also serves as an emergency beacon. From below came sounds of splintering wood and breaking glass, as if the house itself was being torn apart. The door to the tower room shuddered under a heavy impact, the wood beginning to splinter. Dr. Winters worked frantically at the machine, which emitted a high-pitched whine and pulsed with an eerie blue light. "It's not working. The signal isn't strong enough." She pulled a small knife from her pocket and, before I could react, dragged it across her palm. "The machine needs blood to amplify the signal. The entities are repelled by freely given human blood. That's one of the few weaknesses we've discovered." She pressed her bleeding hand against a metal plate on the machine. The blue light pulsed brighter, and she held out the knife to me. "Your turn, Mr. Parker. It needs more than one sacrifice to reach full power." With a resigned nod, I took the knife and cut my palm, pressing it against the metal plate beside hers. The effect was immediate. The machine's light flared blindingly bright, and a pulse of energy radiated outward. Outside, the sky darkened unnaturally, clouds swirling above the manor. Lightning crackled, moving closer. The door finally gave way, but instead of darkness flooding in, it hung back as if held at bay by an invisible barrier. The entities pressed against the barrier, their whispers rising to screams of frustration. Lightning struck the tower, the current running through the structure and into the machine beneath our hands. The pain was excruciating, but somehow I maintained contact. In that moment of blinding clarity, I saw the truth. William Blackwood hadn't made a deal with these entities, but had tried to contain them. The manor hadn't been built to invite them in. It had been constructed as a prison, an elaborate lock on a door that had existed since before human civilization. Catherine Blackwood hadn't disappeared, but had sacrificed herself to strengthen the seal when it weakened in 1924. The government researchers had worked not to exploit the entities, but to find better ways to contain them. Each generation of Shadowvale residents keeping the secret, bearing the burden. The machine beneath our hands pulsed with power, drawing energy from the lightning and our blood. The barrier solidified, pushing the entities back inch by inch. Their screams turned to distant whispers as they were forced down towards the threshold. A final massive lightning strike hit the tower. The machine exploded in a shower of sparks. Dr. Winters and I were thrown backward, breaking our contact with the device. When my vision cleared, the doorway was empty. No writhing darkness, no whispers, no unnatural cold. "We did it," Dr. Winters gasped. "The containment is restored. For now." "For now?" I echoed, examining my blistered palm. "The seal is never permanent. It weakens over time, requiring periodic renewal. That's why the Blackwoods built this place, why the Historical Society maintains it. We're the guardians of the threshold." And now I'm one of them, I realized. That's why you really brought me here, not just for my expertise, but to recruit me. She didn't deny it. We need new blood, literally and figuratively. Few people have the resilience to accept the truth of what lies beneath Blackwood Manor. Part 4. The Legacy. 3 months have passed since that night in the tower. The manor has been my home and my obsession ever since. Each day brings new discoveries about the house and its purpose. Each night brings dreams of the threshold and what lies beyond it. The containment structure has been fully repaired. I've overseen the restoration of key architectural elements, not just for historical accuracy, but because each column, arch, and corbel plays a role in the complex system that keeps the threshold sealed. I've spent countless hours studying the journals of previous caretakers, learning the true history of Blackwood Manor. William Blackwood dedicated his fortune to containing the entities. The mansion was designed with the help of architects who had experience with similar phenomena. Yes, Blackwood Manor isn't the only structure of its kind. The Department of Defense involvement added modern technology to ancient containment methods. The records make for disturbing reading, reports of researchers driven mad by prolonged exposure to the entities, of objects that defied the laws of physics. As for Catherine Blackwood, she recognized the importance of the family secret. According to records I found, she performed a ritual that strengthened the seal on the threshold at the cost of her own life. She wasn't murdered. She sacrificed herself willingly. It's a tradition that has continued through generations of caretakers. The ultimate sacrifice is rarely required, but the willingness to make it is what binds us together. My blood, mingling with Eleanor's in the tower that night, initiated me into this solemn brotherhood. The strangest part is how quickly I've accepted it as my new reality. Perhaps it's because, on some level, I always sensed there was more to the world than what could be easily explained. Life at Blackwood Manor has settled into an unusual routine. By day, I continue the restoration work, documenting the structure's unique features while subtly reinforcing the containment elements. By night, I join Eleanor and other society members in monitoring the threshold. Yet despite all our precautions, the entities still make their presence known. Cold spots throughout the house, objects that move when no one is looking, whispers at the edge of hearing, the occasional vivid dream shared by multiple residents, featuring blue-eyed shadows and impossible geometric patterns. These manifestations are minor, bleed through from beyond the threshold rather than actual breaches. We document each occurrence, always watchful for signs of escalation. Tonight, as I write this account in my quarters, I can hear the familiar creaks and groans of this old house settling, but I can also distinguish the other sounds now, the ones that come from somewhere else. They no longer frighten me as they once did. Fear has been replaced by respect and vigilance. What lies beyond the threshold is not evil in any human sense. It's simply other, incompatible with our reality. I've come to believe that places like Blackwood Manor exist all over the world, structures built to contain aspects of reality that most humans aren't equipped to comprehend. The true purpose of Gothic spires, Egyptian pyramids, stone circles, and other architectural wonders may be hidden from public knowledge. We are not alone in this universe, or even on this planet. The barriers between worlds are thinner than most people realize, and in places where those barriers are weakest, you'll find structures like Blackwood Manor and people like me keeping watch. If you ever find yourself drawn to an old house that seems to watch you back, if you experience inexplicable cold spots or hear whispers that shouldn't be there, if objects move on their own or shadows don't quite match their sources, you might be near a threshold. And if you are, look for the signs, the subtle architectural elements that form a pattern, the symbols hidden in plain sight. We won't identify ourselves to you. We won't confirm your suspicions. But we'll be watching, evaluating whether you're someone who might someday join our ranks. The burden of knowledge is not for everyone, but for those who can bear it. There is no more important work. As for me, I've found my purpose at last. Blackwood Manor is my home now, and its secrets are mine to keep. The threshold beneath it will remain contained as long as I draw breath. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in thresholds and what waits beyond them. I believe in the thin places where reality wears transparent. And I believe in the responsibility of those who know the truth to protect those who don't. If you ever pass through Shadowvale, Massachusetts, you might see Blackwood Manor on the hill, restored to its Gothic splendor. You might even tour its grand rooms and admire its architectural details, but you won't see the hidden door in the library or the chamber that lies beneath. Those secrets remain with the Shadowvale Historical Society, with people like Eleanor Winters and me. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some doors are meant to stay closed, and some thresholds should never be crossed. Wait, did you hear that? That whisper just at the edge of hearing? That cold breath on the back of your neck? Perhaps there's a threshold closer to you than you realize. Perhaps the barriers between worlds are thinning wherever you are right now. Look for the signs. Stay vigilant. And if you see a shadow that doesn't quite match its source, run. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more tales from the shadows. Have you ever experienced something that couldn't be explained? A cold spot in your home? Objects moving on their own? Whispers when you're alone? Share your experiences in the comments below. Perhaps you've encountered a threshold of your own and never knew it. Until next time, sleep well, if you can. Story number 2. Have you ever wondered if those urban legends you heard as a teenager were actually based on something real? Something sinister that happened long ago that got twisted and changed with each retelling until it barely resembled the truth? Well, I'm about to tell you the real story behind one of America's most famous urban legends, the Hookman. But be warned, once you know the truth, you might wish you had just stuck with the fiction. This isn't just another campfire tale. This is what really happened in the small town of Oak Ridge, Michigan in the autumn of 1973, a story that's been buried for decades. Until now. If this story keeps you up tonight, unable to close your eyes without seeing shadows on your walls, remember, you asked for the truth. And if you enjoy this dark journey into America's hidden history, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories that lurk in the shadows of our past. Trust me, this is just the beginning. And now, the real story of the Hookman begins. Part 1. I've lived in Oak Ridge all my life. It's one of those quintessential American small towns that dot the Michigan landscape. Population barely breaking 5,000. One main street with a diner that's been serving the same blueberry pie recipe since 1952, and enough gossip to fuel a dozen soap operas. Yet somehow, everyone here still keeps their secrets, including me. My name is Jacob Wheeler, and I'm the town historian. Or at least that's what people call me. In truth, I just run the local library and have a habit of collecting stories that others would rather forget. For decades, I've heard whispers about what happened that autumn in '73, about the Hookman. But I never knew the whole story. Not until last week, when Marion Caldwell finally decided to tell me everything before she passed. I was organizing the microfiche archives in the library basement when my phone rang. It was Marion's granddaughter saying her grandmother was asking for me specifically. She says she needs to tell you about what happened at Lake Whisper, before it's too late. Lake Whisper. Just the name of that place still sends shivers down my spine. A small, secluded lake surrounded by dense pine forest about 15 miles outside of town. Once a popular spot for teenagers to park their cars and do what teenagers do, until the autumn of 1973. Marion was 87 now, her mind still sharp as a tack, even as her body failed her. I found her propped up in a hospital bed that had been set up in her living room, oxygen tubes in her nose, a collection of pill bottles on the bedside table. Her voice was weak, but her eyes fixed on me the moment I walked in. "Jacob," she said, "I need to tell you what really happened. I'm the last one left who knows the truth, and someone needs to remember." She motioned for me to sit beside her bed. "You know the stories about the hookman, I'm sure. The killer with a hook for a hand who terrorized couples at Lover's Lane?" I nodded. Everyone in America knows some version of that urban legend. Well, it wasn't just a story here. Not in Oak Ridge. Something real happened. Something that got twisted and changed over the years. But I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. Marion had been a nurse at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital in 1973, just 38 years old, with 2 teenage daughters of her own. "It all started with Thomas Blackwood," she said, though that wasn't the name we knew him by back then. Thomas Blackwood had moved to Oak Ridge in the summer of '73, buying an old farmhouse out near Lake Whisper. A quiet man in his 40s, he kept to himself mostly, but was polite when he came into town for supplies. Some said he'd been in Vietnam, others that he'd lost his family in an accident. In small towns, rumors fill in the gaps when facts are scarce. The first incident happened in early September. Marion continued, her bony fingers fidgeting with her blanket. A young couple, high school seniors, came into the emergency room around midnight. The boy, David Thompson, had a deep laceration on his shoulder. The girl, Sarah Miller, was hysterical. They'd been parked at Lake Whisper in David's blue Chevy Impala. Sarah claimed they'd seen a man watching them from the trees. A tall figure, just standing there in the darkness. When David got out to confront him, the man attacked, slashing at him with something sharp before disappearing into the woods. The couple drove straight to the hospital, terrified and bleeding. "I cleaned and stitched David's wound myself," Marion said. "It was unusual, not like a knife wound. The edges were jagged, almost like a hook or curved blade had done it." Sheriff Walter Collins took their statements, but didn't find much when he went out to Lake Whisper the next morning. Just some blood on the ground and strange tracks leading into the forest that seemed to vanish after about 100 yards. The incident was chalked up to a drifter passing through, and life in Oak Ridge continued. But 2 weeks later, it happened again. Another couple, another attack. This time, they described the man more clearly. Tall and gaunt, with a dirty coat and something wrong with his right hand. "It wasn't like a hand at all," the girl had told Marion in the emergency room. "It was like metal, twisted and sharp." By early October, Lake Whisper was officially off limits. Sheriff Collins had deputies patrolling the area, but the attacks continued. Always couples, always at night, always the same description of the attacker. The town was gripped by fear. Parents keeping their teenagers under strict curfew, the local paper running front-page warnings about the Lake Whisper attacker. "But here's what most people don't know," Marion whispered, leaning closer to me. "Thomas Blackwood came into the emergency room himself on October 12th, with a self-inflicted wound on his right hand." Marion had been on duty that night. Blackwood claimed he'd had an accident with a farming tool, but the injury was severe. His hand was mangled beyond repair, with several fingers nearly severed. Dr. Richard Hayes had no choice but to amputate. "He was strange during his recovery, Marion said. Kept talking about the teenagers at the lake, how they were trespassing on his property, disrespecting the sanctity of the place. He became fixated on it. And then, just 3 days after his surgery, he checked himself out against medical advice and disappeared. The attack stopped. For almost 2 weeks, no incidents were reported at Lake Whisper. The town began to breathe easier, thinking perhaps the attacker had moved on, until Halloween night, when everything changed. 4 teenagers went missing that night. Marion's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. My youngest daughter's friends. They decided to drive out to Lake Whisper as a Halloween dare. Their car was found the next morning, doors open, abandoned, but no sign of the kids. The largest search party in Oak Ridge history combed the forests around Lake Whisper for days. Sheriff Collins called in help from neighboring counties, even had a helicopter from the state police assist. But they found nothing. Until a week later, when Deputy James Rankin decided to check Thomas Blackwood's farmhouse. Marion paused here, her breathing becoming labored. Her granddaughter stepped in to adjust her oxygen, telling me perhaps we should continue another day. But Marion shook her head firmly. No time, she insisted. Need to finish. What they found in that farmhouse, she continued after catching her breath, wasn't in any newspaper. The sheriff made sure of that. But I heard it from James Rankin himself years later, after he'd had too much to drink at his retirement party. The farmhouse was empty, no sign of Blackwood. But in the basement, they found something that haunted Rankin for the rest of his life. Evidence that Blackwood had been living there for months, walls covered with strange writings and drawings of Lake Whisper, and a crude workshop where he'd apparently crafted something to replace his amputated hand. Something made from farming tools and scrap metal. A hook. They also found one of the missing teenagers, Marion whispered. Just one, hidden in a root cellar beneath the workshop floor. Alive, but traumatized beyond words. She never spoke about what happened to her or the others. Not to anyone. She left town with her family the following week. Sheriff Collins organized a manhunt for Thomas Blackwood that stretched across 3 states. But they never found him, or the other 3 missing teenagers. The case eventually went cold, filed away in the back of the sheriff's office. A dark chapter in Oak Ridge history that people preferred not to discuss. But that's not where it ends, Marion said, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Because I saw him again. 20 years later. In the summer of 1993, Marion had been camping with her husband at Riverside State Park, about 200 miles north of Oak Ridge. They'd been hiking one of the more remote trails when she saw him. An old man, gaunt and weathered, sitting by a small fire outside a crude shelter in the woods. I knew it was him immediately, she said. Even after all those years. There was something about his eyes. And his right arm ended in a dirty bandage, nothing visible below the wrist. But he was different, broken somehow. Marion's husband hadn't understood why she'd suddenly turned them around, practically running back to their campsite. She never told him who she'd seen, never told anyone until now. I should have reported it, she admitted, regret heavy in her voice. But I was afraid he'd somehow find me if I did. And honestly, part of me thought maybe he'd suffered enough. He looked like a man already in hell. Marion fell silent for a moment, her eyes distant with memory. But that's not why I needed to tell you this story, Jacob. It's what I found out later, what connects everything together. In 1995, Marion had been helping the hospital archive old medical records when she came across Thomas Blackwood's file from 1973. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. What she found changed everything she thought she knew about the Hookman of Oak Ridge. His medical history showed he'd been a patient at Baxter Psychiatric Hospital in northern Michigan for almost 15 years before coming to Oak Ridge. diagnosed with severe PTSD and paranoid delusions following his service in Vietnam. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. According to the records, Thomas Blackwood had grown up in Oak Ridge in the 1940s. His family had owned the property surrounding Lake Whisper until a tragedy occurred in 1952. Blackwood, just 17 at the time, had taken his girlfriend to the lake one summer night. They'd gone swimming, but she drowned in a terrible accident. Her body was found with a hunting hook embedded in her neck. Thomas had been cleared of any wrongdoing. Evidence suggested he'd tried desperately to save her, even fashioning a crude hook from his fishing gear to try to reach her when she began drowning further from shore. But the trauma of that night broke something inside him. After a mental breakdown, his parents sent him to Baxter, where he remained until enlisting in the Army in 1967. Vietnam only deepened his trauma. He came back to Oak Ridge in '73 to make peace with his past, Marion explained. But seeing young couples at the lake where his girlfriend died, it triggered something in him. Awakened old demons. I sat there, trying to process this revelation. The true origin of the Hookman legend wasn't a psychopathic killer, but a damaged man unable to escape his own tragedy. It explained so much, yet left so many questions unanswered. But what about the missing teenagers? I asked. The one they found in his basement? Marion's face darkened. That's the other part of the story. The part Sheriff Collins buried, because it implicated his own son. Sheriff Walter Collins had a son named Patrick, a troubled 19-year-old with a history of violence and cruelty to animals. He'd been the one to start the Halloween dare, convincing the 4 younger teens to go to Lake Whisper that night. But he hadn't gone with them. The girl they found in Blackwood's basement eventually told a state police detective what really happened, Marion said. Patrick Collins had followed them to the lake, planning to scare them as a prank. He was wearing some kind of costume with a fake hook. But things went wrong. Terribly wrong. According to the girl, Patrick's prank had turned violent. When one of the boys tried to fight back, Patrick attacked him with the metal hook prop he'd created. What started as a sick joke became a night of terror. 3 of the teens tried to escape into the woods, while the 4th, the girl they eventually found, had hidden in the car. Blackwood must have witnessed what happened, Marion theorized. In his damaged mind, it confirmed his delusions about needing to protect the lake. He went after Patrick first, then took the surviving girl to his basement. Not to hurt her, but in some twisted way to protect her. The sheriff, upon discovering his son's involvement, covered it up. He made sure his deputies found evidence pointing solely to Blackwood. The surviving girl's statement was buried, her family paid to leave town quietly. Patrick Collins was sent to live with relatives in California, his name erased from the investigation. That's why they never found Blackwood or the other teenagers, Marion said. Because they were looking for the wrong killer. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. For decades, Oak Ridge had built an urban legend around Thomas Blackwood, painting him as a monster, when the real monster had been walking among them all along. I kept this secret for too long. Marion's voice was growing weaker. Patrick Collins died last month in California. Cancer took him. And now I'm going too. Someone needs to know the truth. I promised her I would document everything, preserve the real story, though I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. The Collins family still held power in Oak Ridge, with Walter's grandson now serving as mayor. There's one more thing, Marion said, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. Something I've never told anyone about what I saw at Riverside State Park in '93. When Marion had spotted Thomas Blackwood at the state park, she hadn't immediately turned away as she'd told her husband. She'd actually returned later, alone, while her husband was fishing. Something had compelled her to speak with the man who had haunted Oak Ridge for so long. He recognized me, she said. Called me Nurse Caldwell right away. His mind wasn't gone, just fractured. living in different times simultaneously. They had talked for nearly an hour, Blackwood shifting between moments of clarity and confusion. He spoke of Vietnam, of his childhood in Oak Ridge, of the girlfriend he'd lost at Lake Whisper, and of Halloween night, 1973.
He told me he'd been watching the lake that night, Marion continued. Said he'd seen a demon with a hook attacking the teenagers. He'd tried to intervene, fighting with the demon and chasing it into the woods. But by the time he returned, 3 of the teens were gone. He found the girl hiding in the car, traumatized. So he took her to his home, trying in his broken way to keep her safe. Blackwood had fled when the police came, convinced they wouldn't believe him, that they'd blame him for everything because he was the crazy man. He'd been living in the wilderness ever since, moving from place to place, haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save. I asked him about the hook, Marion said, if he'd really replaced his hand with one. He showed me his right arm, then there was no hook, just a badly healed amputation. He said he'd never had a hook. It was just a story people told because they needed a monster to fear. The realization had hit Marion like a physical blow. The Hookman of Oak Ridge had never existed. Thomas Blackwood was just a damaged veteran with a tragic past. The real monster had been Patrick Collins, whose Halloween prank with a fake hook had spun wildly out of control, and a corrupt sheriff who'd protected his son at the cost of an innocent man's reputation. I should have come forward then. Marion's voice was thick with regret. Should have told someone what I knew, but who would have believed me against Sheriff Collins? And what good would it have done after 20 years? So she'd kept the secret. Until now. I don't know what happened to those other 3 teenagers, she admitted. Blackwood didn't know either. He thought Patrick Collins had killed them in the woods that night. But their bodies were never found. I sat in silence, trying to absorb everything she'd told me. The true story behind one of America's most famous urban legends was far more complex, far more tragic than anyone could have imagined. "There's a box under my bed," Marion said suddenly. "Get it for me, please." Her granddaughter retrieved a small wooden box, weathered with age. Marion's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of newspaper clippings, old photographs, and a small notebook. Everything I could gather about that time. About Thomas Blackwood, the Collins family, the missing teenagers, and this. She handed me a folded piece of paper. A map, hand-drawn in fading ink. It showed Lake Whisper and the surrounding forest, with an X marked in a remote area to the north. "Blackwood gave me this in '93, she explained. Said if I ever wanted to know the whole truth I should look there, but I was too afraid, too cowardly. I studied the map carefully, recognizing the area. It was still undeveloped, part of a nature preserve now. Will you go?" Marion asked, her eyes imploring. "Will you finish what I was too afraid to start?" I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I'll go." Relief washed over her tired face. "Good. There's one more thing you should know. About Patrick Collins. In the years following that Halloween night, Patrick had built a successful life in California. But according to rumors Marion had heard from her cousin who lived nearby, he was haunted by something. Neighbors reported hearing him screaming in the night about the real Hookman, about something following him. Patrick was found dead in his garage, Marion said. The official cause was suicide, but my cousin said his right hand had been severed, cut clean off, and was never found. A chill ran through me. "You think?" Marion shook her head weakly. "I don't know what to think anymore, except that some stories don't end. They just wait for someone new to tell them." 2 days later, Marion Caldwell passed away peacefully in her sleep. and I found myself standing at the edge of Lake Whisper, map in hand, preparing to hike into the forest to the spot marked with an X. The lake was beautiful in the autumn light, crimson and gold leaves reflecting on its still surface. Hard to imagine the darkness that had unfolded here decades ago. I checked my backpack, flashlight, water, first aid kit, shovel, and began following the trail that would lead me to Blackwood's marked spot. It took nearly 3 hours of hiking through increasingly dense forest. The trail had disappeared long ago, leaving me to navigate by compass and the old map. Finally, I reached a small clearing that matched the area marked on Blackwood's map. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just a peaceful forest glade. But as I moved toward the center, I noticed an unusual arrangement of stones. A crude circle, nearly hidden by decades of fallen leaves and forest debris. I began to dig. The soil was soft, yielding easily to my shovel. I'd gone down about 3 feet when I hit something solid. Carefully, I cleared away the remaining dirt to reveal a metal box, roughly the size of a small suitcase. It was rusted but intact, secured with a simple padlock that broke easily when struck with the shovel. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items carefully wrapped in oilcloth, preserved against the elements, a small leather-bound journal, a stack of photographs, a metal identification tag from Vietnam, and a weathered leather pouch. I opened the journal first, recognizing immediately that it belonged to Thomas Blackwood. The handwriting was erratic, sometimes clear and precise, other times nearly illegible. Pages filled with his thoughts, his fears, his memories, and his account of what happened on Halloween night, 1973. According to Blackwood, he'd been patrolling his property that night, concerned about trespassers after the previous incidents at the lake. He'd witnessed Patrick Collins attacking the teenagers, wearing what appeared to be a costume with a realistic-looking hook attachment over his right hand. Blackwood had intervened, fighting with Patrick and chasing him into the woods. But by the time he returned to help the teenagers, he found only the girl hiding in the car. The others had fled into the forest in different directions during the chaos. He'd taken the traumatized girl to his home, intending to call the police once she was calm. But before he could, he saw flashlight beams approaching his property. Panicking, he hid the girl in his basement and fled into the night. For weeks, he'd hidden in the forest, watching the investigation unfold from a distance. He saw how quickly suspicion turned to him, how the narrative of the crazy man with a hook for a hand took shape. But most disturbing of all, he witnessed Sheriff Collins and his son returning to the woods late one night in November, carrying something heavy into the deepest part of the forest. The last pages of the journal contained Blackwood's increasingly paranoid thoughts as he prepared to leave Oak Ridge forever. But not before burying this box in the location he would later mark on the map for Marion, a time capsule of truth in case anyone ever cared enough to look for it. Next, I examined the photographs. Some were old pictures of Blackwood's youth in Oak Ridge, his family, his girlfriend before the drowning accident. But others were more disturbing. Surveillance photos he'd apparently taken of Patrick Collins in the weeks following Halloween, and most chillingly, photos of what appeared to be Sheriff Collins and his son in the forest at night, taken from a distance with a flash camera. The leather pouch contained the final piece of evidence, a metal hook crudely fashioned from what looked like a modified farming tool. Not Blackwood's prosthetic, but rather what appeared to be Patrick Collins' Halloween prop, the weapon used to attack the teenagers. I sat in that forest clearing for a long time, surrounded by these fragments of a 50-year-old tragedy. The true story of the Hookman of Oak Ridge wasn't about a crazed killer with a hook for a hand. It was about a traumatized veteran who witnessed a crime and became the perfect scapegoat. A corrupt sheriff protecting his son, and 3 teenagers whose fate remained unknown. As the sun began to set, I carefully repacked everything into my backpack. This evidence needed to be preserved, documented, perhaps even turned over to the state police. The full story of what happened in 1973 deserved to be told, no matter how many powerful people in Oak Ridge wanted it to stay buried. I was nearly back to the trail when something caught my eye. A flash of metal in the underbrush off to my right. Curious, I moved closer, pushing aside the tangled growth to reveal what appeared to be the rusted frame of an old car, almost completely reclaimed by the forest. And beyond it, barely visible in the fading light, what looked like the entrance to an old mine shaft, its wooden supports rotted and collapsing. This wasn't on Blackwood's map, but a memory stirred from my research into Oak Ridge history. The Collins family hadn't just been prominent in law enforcement. They'd owned the mining company that operated in these woods until the late 1950s. I stood at the edge of a new mystery, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Was this where Sheriff Collins and his son had gone that November night? Was this where the truth about those 3 missing teenagers had been buried? Night was falling fast, and I wasn't equipped for a mine exploration. This would have to wait for another day, with proper equipment and perhaps backup. But as I turned to leave, a sound stopped me cold. A metallic scraping from somewhere in the darkness of the mine entrance, like something sharp being dragged across stone. I told myself it was just falling debris, the settling of an old structure. But as I hurried back toward the safety of the main trail, another thought formed unbidden in my mind. Marion's final words about Patrick Collins' mysterious death, his severed right hand that was never found. Some stories don't end, they just wait for someone new to tell them. I've documented everything I found at Lake Whisper, copied Blackwood's journal, scanned the photographs, secured the physical evidence. If you're watching this, it means I've shared the true story of the Hookman of Oak Ridge with the world. But I haven't yet returned to that mine shaft. Tomorrow, I go back to find whatever secrets still lie buried in the darkness, to finally uncover the fate of those 3 missing teenagers, and to see if the scraping sound I heard was merely falling rocks, or something else. If I don't return, well, I guess you'll have a new urban legend to tell, about the historian who went looking for the truth about the Hookman, and found it. But before I go, I have to ask, what urban legends did you grow up hearing? Were they just stories meant to scare teenagers away from misbehaving? Or could they, like the Hookman of Oak Ridge, be disguising darker truths that someone wanted to keep hidden? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've heard any strange scraping sounds outside your window at night, well, maybe just keep that to yourself. If you enjoyed this true account of the Hookman legend, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, there are more forgotten horrors lurking in America's small towns, and I intend to bring them all into the light. Assuming, of course, that I make it back from the mine tomorrow. Until next time, sleep tight, and maybe check your car doors are locked, just to be safe.
Story number 3.
The room that kept changing every time I looked away. Have you ever felt that crawling sensation on the back of your neck? That feeling when something just isn't right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I've experienced that feeling, and worse. Much worse. Before I tell you my story, I need you to do something for me. Look around your room right now. Take in every detail, the position of your furniture, the shadows on your wall, the small trinkets on your shelves. Now, close your eyes for 10 seconds. Open them again. Is everything exactly as it was? Are you absolutely certain? Because in my experience, certainty is a luxury we take for granted. If you've ever questioned your own perception of reality, this story might hit a little too close to home. And if you haven't, well, you might start after hearing what happened to me. Make sure you're comfortable. Turn down the lights if you dare, and remember, some things, once noticed, can never be unseen. The story begins now. underscore 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 underscore. I never wanted to move to Millfield, Minnesota. The small Midwestern town with its endless cornfields and single stoplight Main Street was the exact opposite of the bustling Chicago life I had grown accustomed to. But when Graham Keller Publishing offered me a 6-month remote work opportunity with a significant bump in salary, I figured I could endure anything for half a year. Even Millfield. It's just temporary, I reminded myself as I pulled up to the old Victorian house on Sycamore Lane. The rental listing had described it as charming and full of character. Real estate code for outdated and probably haunted. The house stood 3 stories tall, its faded blue paint peeling like old sunburned skin. Bay windows jutted out asymmetrically, giving the facade an off-kilter appearance. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on the left side. It wasn't exactly the cozy writer's retreat I had imagined. My landlady, Mrs. Abernathy, met me at the door. She was a small woman in her 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses that magnified her pale blue eyes to an unsettling degree. "You must be Daniel," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone of her stature. "Welcome to Millfield. Thanks for meeting me on such short notice." I shifted my duffel bag to my other shoulder. The drive took longer than expected. "Oh, these old country roads will do that to you. They tend to wind," she smiled, revealing 2 perfect dentures. "Now, let me show you around." The interior of the house was exactly what you'd expect. Floral wallpaper, creaky hardwood floors, and the unmistakable scent of mothballs and lemon furniture polish. Mrs. Abernathy led me through the downstairs. Living room, dining room, kitchen, all furnished with heavy antiques that looked like they hadn't been moved in decades. The previous tenant left rather abruptly, Mrs. Abernathy mentioned casually as we climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. Something about a job opportunity out west. Didn't even take most of his things. That's convenient, I guess. I tried not to think about why someone would leave furniture behind. "Your bedroom is here," she said, pushing open a door at the end of the hallway. "Bathrooms across the hall, the 3rd floor is just storage. No need to go up there." I stepped into the bedroom and immediately felt a strange sensation. Not quite déjà vu, but something similar. Like I had dreamed of this exact room before. It was spacious enough, with a queen-sized bed, a writing desk beneath the window, a tall mahogany wardrobe and a small bookshelf. A worn Persian rug covered most of the hardwood floor. Nothing extraordinary, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I'll leave you to get settled," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Rent's due on the 1st. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Any questions?" I had 1,000 questions, but none I could articulate. "No, I think I'm good for now. Thanks." After she left, I set my laptop on the desk and began unpacking. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, creating shapes that seemed to stretch and contract with each passing cloud. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. That first night, exhausted from the drive, I fell into a dreamless sleep. The trouble began the next morning. I woke up disoriented the way you do in hotel rooms before remembering where I was. As I blinked away the sleep from my eyes, I noticed something strange about the room. The writing desk, which I distinctly remembered being under the window, was now against the opposite wall. I sat up, frowning. Had I misremembered? The long drive, the unfamiliar surroundings, it was entirely possible that my tired brain had jumbled the details. After a quick shower, I returned to the room to get dressed. As I opened the wardrobe to hang up my clothes, I froze. The wardrobe, which I could have sworn was on the left side of the room, now stood on the right, "What the?" I muttered, turning slowly to take in the entire room. Everything looked almost right, but not quite. Like someone had taken a photograph of the room, then recreated it with subtle differences. I chalked it up to fatigue and jet lag, even though I'd driven and there was no time difference between Chicago and Minnesota. Still, the brain plays tricks when you're tired and in new surroundings. That had to be it. By noon, I had set up my workstation and was deep into editing a manuscript about urban legends of the Midwest, an assignment that now seemed unnervingly appropriate. The work kept my mind occupied, and I forgot about the strange feeling from that morning, until I got up to make a coffee. When I returned to the bedroom, mug in hand, I stopped dead in my tracks. The bookshelf, which had been empty that morning, now contained several leather-bound volumes, and the Persian rug had rotated about 45 degrees. I set my coffee down carefully on the desk, certain that I was losing my mind. I approached the bookshelf and pulled out one of the volumes. New England Folk Remedies, read the title. I flipped it open to find yellowed pages filled with handwritten notes in the margins. Mrs. Abernathy must have put these here while I was in the kitchen, I reasoned aloud, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet room. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I would have heard her come up the stairs, would have seen her in the hallway. I spent the rest of the day glancing up from my work every few minutes, half expecting to catch the furniture in the act of moving. Nothing changed while I was watching. But every time I left the room, to use the bathroom, to get more coffee, to stretch my legs, I returned to find something different. The bed shifted a few inches to the left. The curtains changed from beige to a faded blue. A small crack appeared in the ceiling, then disappeared the next time I looked. By evening, I was thoroughly unnerved. I considered calling Mrs. Abernathy, but what would I say? "Excuse me, I think your house is rearranging itself when I'm not looking?" She'd think I was insane. Instead, I decided to conduct an experiment. I took photos of the room from different angles, making sure to capture every detail. Then I went downstairs to make dinner, leaving my phone on the kitchen counter. I needed to rule out the possibility that my phone was somehow part of whatever was happening. 20 minutes later, pasta in hand, I returned to find the room had changed again. The writing desk was now positioned diagonally in the corner. The wardrobe doors were slightly ajar, though I was certain I had closed them. And most disturbingly, there was now a rocking chair by the window, a piece of furniture that hadn't been there before. I pulled out my phone and compared the photos I had taken earlier to the room before me. The differences were unmistakable. This wasn't my imagination. The room was changing. But how and why? That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes. The rocking chair by the window seemed to be watching me, its curved wooden arms like skeletal hands gripping the armrests. Once, I thought I saw it move slightly, as if pushed by an invisible hand, but when I turned on the lamp, it was perfectly still. Around 3 a.m, I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by the sound of footsteps from the 3rd floor, the storage area Mrs. Abernathy had told me not to go to. Thump, 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 heavy and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. I held my breath, listening intently, but the sound stopped as abruptly as it had started. Just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses make noise, it's normal. But deep down, I knew there was nothing normal about this house. The next morning, I awoke to find the room completely rearranged. The bed was now in the center, the wardrobe was gone entirely, and the walls, which had been a faded yellow, were now covered in dark green wallpaper with a pattern of intertwining vines. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding. This was no subtle change. This was a complete transformation. I grabbed my phone to check the photos from yesterday, only to find they had been deleted. No, not deleted. The photo app showed they were still there, but when I tried to open them, each one was just a blurry mess of pixels, as if something had deliberately corrupted them. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. I threw on some clothes and practically ran downstairs, hoping to find Mrs. Abernathy. The house was silent, save for the tick-tock of an old grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock I didn't remember seeing the day before. I found a note on the kitchen table. Had to go to Minneapolis for a few days. Emergency with my sister. Help yourself to anything in the fridge, Mrs. A. Great. I was alone in this. Whatever this was. I considered leaving, just getting in my car and driving back to Chicago. But I had signed a lease, paid a deposit, and committed to this job. And what would I tell my editors? Sorry, I can't finish the assignment because my bedroom keeps rearranging itself? No, I needed to figure this out. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Gas leak causing hallucinations? Some elaborate prank? Or maybe, and this thought chilled me more than the others, maybe something truly unexplainable was happening. I decided to investigate the third floor. Mrs. Abernathy had said it was just storage, but those footsteps last night had come from up there. And if there were answers to be found, that seemed like the place to start. The staircase to the third floor was hidden behind a door at the end of the second floor hallway. It was narrower than the main stairs, and each step groaned under my weight as I ascended. The air grew noticeably colder as I reached the top. The third floor was one large open space with sloped ceilings and dormer windows that let in dusty shafts of light. It was filled with furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in various poses. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the walls, and old trunks were scattered throughout. I moved slowly, lifting sheets to reveal antique chairs, a child's rocking horse, a grandfather clock identical to the one now downstairs. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary for an attic storage space, until I reached the far corner. There, positioned to face the wall, was a large ornate mirror in a gilded frame. Unlike everything else, it wasn't covered with a sheet. Its surface was tarnished and cloudy, yet it still reflected my approach, the image distorted as if viewed through rippling water. As I stood before it, I noticed small symbols etched around the frame, intricate patterns that weren't quite letters or pictures, but something in between. And at the bottom of the frame, nearly hidden by dust, was an inscription, Videre in viso. My 4 years of high school Latin were rusty, but I roughly translated it as to see the unseen. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the glass. Something told me not to touch it, that doing so would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the mirror. The moment the shutter sound echoed in the quiet room, I heard a door slam somewhere downstairs. I jumped, nearly dropping my phone, and listened. Footsteps, coming up the stairs, heavy and deliberate, just like the ones I had heard last night. Thump, thump, thump. But Mrs. Abernathy was in Minneapolis. I was supposed to be alone. I backed away from the mirror, looking frantically for somewhere to hide. The footsteps reached the second floor, then continued up toward the third. Thump, thump, thump. In a panic, I ducked behind a large covered piece of furniture, a wardrobe or cabinet of some kind. I held my breath as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Silence. Then the sound of breathing. Not my own. This was deeper, raspier, like someone who had just finished running a marathon. I peered around the edge of my hiding place but couldn't see anyone. The breathing moved across the room, stopping at various points, as if someone was examining each covered piece of furniture. It was getting closer to me. I pressed myself against the wall, willing myself to be invisible. The breathing stopped just on the other side of the furniture I was hiding behind. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the white sheet covering my hiding place began to lift. I closed my eyes, too terrified to look at whatever was about to find me. But instead of discovery, I heard a sudden whoosh, like a gust of wind, followed by the sound of the third-floor door slamming shut. I opened my eyes. The room was empty, the breathing, the footsteps, gone. With shaking legs, I made my way back to the staircase and down to the second floor. When I reached my bedroom, I froze in the doorway. The room had changed again. But this time it wasn't just furniture that had moved. The room was now an exact replica of my childhood bedroom in Boston, from the baseball pennants on the wall to the model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. Every detail was perfect, down to the chip in the headboard from when I had dropped a trophy on it in 7th grade. This wasn't random anymore. This was personal. Whatever was happening, it knew me. It knew my past. And suddenly, I understood with terrifying clarity, I wasn't just observing these changes, I was part of them. That night, I barricaded myself in the kitchen. It was the only room in the house that seemed immune to the strange changes. I pushed a chair against the door and settled in for a sleepless night. My laptop open to distract myself with work. Around midnight, my phone chimed with a notification. It was the photo app, reminding me that I hadn't backed up my recent photos, including, I realized, the picture of the mirror I had taken in the attic. I opened the image, half expecting it to be corrupted like the others, but it wasn't. The mirror was clearly visible, its tarnished surface reflecting. I zoomed in, my blood turning to ice. The mirror wasn't reflecting me, the photographer. It was reflecting the room behind me, but not as it had been when I took the photo. In the reflection, the furniture wasn't covered with sheets. Instead, they were arranged as if in use, and standing among them were shadowy figures, their features indistinct except for their eyes. Bright, watching eyes that seemed to stare directly at the camera. At me. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. It clattered on the kitchen tile, the screen now showing my homepage as if the photo had closed itself. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and tried to find the image again. But, like the others, it was now just a corrupted file that wouldn't open. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. I must have dozed off at some point because I jerked awake to the sound of the kitchen radio turning on by itself. Static crackling before settling on a station playing music from the 1940s. I fumbled to turn it off, but the knob rotated uselessly under my fingers. The music continued, a haunting melody I vaguely recognized but couldn't name. Then, cutting through the music, a voice. Daniel. Just my name, spoken in a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Who's there? I demanded, my voice breaking. What do you want? The radio crackled, the music fading in and out before the voice returned, clearer this time. See what we see, Daniel. I don't understand, I said, backing away from the radio. What am I supposed to see? The room changes because you change it. Every time you look away, you forget what was, and create what is. A chill ran down my spine. That's impossible. I'm not doing anything. The voice, now sounding like multiple voices speaking in unison, replied, Not consciously, but your mind, your memories. They're powerful. They're rewriting this space. And we've been watching, learning, adapting. Who are you? I whispered. We are the forgotten, the overlooked, the ones who lived here before, in the spaces between perception. We've been waiting for someone like you, Daniel. Someone whose mind is porous. The radio suddenly blared with static, making me jump. When it cleared, the regular late-night program was playing. A talk show about conspiracy theories. As if the conversation I'd just had never happened. I spent the remainder of the night huddled in the corner of the kitchen, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. When dawn finally broke, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was happening, whatever these entities wanted from me, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I packed a bag with essentials, planning to drive to the nearest hotel and figure out my next move from there. But as I headed for the front door, I found it wouldn't open. The knob turned, the bolt retracted, but it was as if something on the other side was holding it shut. I tried the back door, same result. Then the windows, all sealed, not by locks or nails, but by some invisible force. I was trapped. As this realization sank in, the house seemed to come alive around me. The lights flickered, the temperature dropped, and from upstairs came the now familiar footsteps. Thump, 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 but this time they didn't stay upstairs. They descended to the second floor, then the first, moving inexorably toward the foyer where I stood frozen. I backed away, retreating toward the kitchen, my supposed safe haven. But, as I passed the living room, something caught my eye. The room had changed. The furniture was gone, replaced by a single item in the center, the mirror from the third floor. It stood there, its cloudy surface reflecting distorted versions of the room, not as it was now, but as it had been at various points in its history. Colonial-era furnishings gave way to Victorian decor, which morphed into mid-century modern, then back again in an endless cycle. And in each iteration, shadowy figures moved about, living their lives unaware they were being observed, until they weren't. One by one, the figures in the reflections stopped what they were doing and turned to face the mirror. To face their eyes, bright and hungry, fixed on mine. And as one, they began to move toward the glass, their hands outstretched as if to break through. I turned to run, but found myself face to face with Mrs. Abernathy, except it wasn't quite her. Her features were the same, but her eyes were like those in the mirror, bright, hungry, watching. "You shouldn't have gone to the third floor, Daniel," she said, her voice overlaid with others. "But since you did, you might as well understand what's happening to you." "What are you?" I managed to ask. She smiled, her two perfect dentures gleaming. "We are the Watchers. We exist in the spaces between perception, when you look away, when you blink, when you sleep. We've been here since this house was built, observing, accumulating memories from those who lived here. Why me? Why now? Because you're different, Daniel. Your mind, it's unusually receptive. Most people, when they look away and back, their perception overrides any changes we might make. But you accept the changes. You incorporate them into your reality. It's quite remarkable, really. And the room, why does it keep changing? It's a test. We needed to see how adaptable you were, how much your mind could handle before breaking, and you've exceeded our expectations." She stepped closer, her smile widening unnaturally. "That's why we've chosen you." "Chosen me for what?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer and dreaded it. "To join us, of course, to become a watcher, to exist in the spaces between, observing the living, accumulating their memories, their experiences. It's a gift, Daniel, a form of immortality." I shook my head, backing away. "I don't want that. I want to leave." "I'm afraid that's not possible anymore. You've seen too much, understood too much. The process has already begun." As if on cue, I felt a strange sensation, like parts of me were becoming insubstantial. I looked down at my hands and could see the floorboards through them. "What's happening to me?" I cried out. "You're transitioning," Mrs. Abernathy said calmly. "Becoming like us. Don't fight it, Daniel. It only makes it more difficult." But I did fight it. With every ounce of my being, I concentrated on making myself solid, real, present. I thought of my life in Chicago, my friends, my family, my dreams for the future. I clung to these memories, these truths, using them as anchors to this reality. Slowly, my hands became solid again. I looked up to see Mrs. Abernathy's expression change from smug satisfaction to concern. "That's unexpected," she said. "But it won't make a difference in the end. You're already partly in our world. You just don't realize it yet." For the next 3 days, I engaged in a psychological war with the Watchers. They continued to change the room every time I looked away, each transformation more personal, more disorienting than the last. My college dorm room, my first apartment. The hospital room where my father had died. Each setting was designed to evoke strong emotions, to weaken my resolve, to make me question what was real and what wasn't. I countered by documenting everything. I kept a journal, writing down every detail of the room before I left it. When I returned to find it changed, I would read my notes aloud, affirming what had been there before, rejecting the new reality they were trying to impose. It became a battle of wills, their ability to change my surroundings versus my determination to remember what was real. On the fourth day, Mrs. Abernathy appeared again, looking considerably less confident. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice now only her own, the chorus of others noticeably absent. "Good," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I'm not giving in. I'm not becoming one of you." She sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. "You don't understand what you're refusing, Daniel. We're offering you a kind of existence most people never even glimpse. The ability to observe without being bound by time or physical limitations. At what cost? My humanity, my life? Those are such limited concepts," she said dismissively. "We were all human once, but we evolved. We transcended." "Is that what happened to the previous tenant? The one who left so abruptly?" A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed her face. Marcus was less adaptable than we hoped. His mind fractured before the transition could complete. "You drove him insane," I translated. "We freed him from the constraints of linear perception," she corrected. "But yes, his human consciousness couldn't integrate the experience. Yours, however, has shown remarkable resilience." "I'm not interested in your offer," I said firmly. "I want to leave. Now." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps we've been too aggressive in our approach. The transition works best when it's voluntary. Fighting it creates distortions. So, you'll let me go?" "Not exactly." She gestured toward the living room where the mirror still stood. "But we can show you what we're offering, fully and completely. Let you make an informed decision." I knew it was probably a trap, but after days of psychological warfare, I was exhausted. And if there was even a chance I could convince them to let me go— "Fine," I said. "Show me." Mrs. Abernathy led me to the mirror, which now seemed larger, its surface clearer than before. The symbols around the frame glowed with a faint blue light. "Look deep," she instructed. "See beyond the surface reflection. See as we see." I stared into the mirror, at first seeing only my haggard reflection. But as I continued to look, the surface seemed to ripple, and the reflection changed. I saw the house as it had been throughout history, a family celebrating Christmas in the 1890s, a young couple arguing in the 1920s, children playing hide-and-seek in the 1950s, a lonely old man sitting by the window in the 1980s, and moving among them, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them, were the watchers. They observed, they listened, they fed somehow. Not on blood or flesh, but on moments, on memories, on emotions. I saw Mrs. Abernathy as she had been in life, a schoolteacher in the 1930s who had died in this house. I saw others, dozens of them, all former residents who had been chosen as I had been. And I saw what it meant to be a watcher, the ability to move through time, to experience countless lives, to accumulate vast knowledge, but also the hunger, the constant, gnawing need to consume the experiences of the living, an eternal existence of watching but never truly participating. "Do you see now?" Mrs. Abernathy asked softly. "Do you understand what we're offering?" I did, and in that moment of understanding came clarity. "I see," I said, "and I choose no." Before she could react, I picked up a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby table and swung it at the mirror with all my strength. The glass shattered with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Mrs. Abernathy lunged for me, her form flickering between solid and spectral, but she was too late. As the mirror broke, a shock wave of energy pulsed through the house. The walls trembled, the lights exploded in showers of sparks, and the watchers, suddenly visible as translucent, distorted human figures, were pulled toward the broken mirror like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Mrs. Abernathy's outstretched hand brushed against my arm, her fingers passing partially through my skin, leaving a cold, numb sensation. "You fool!" she hissed, her voice once again a chorus of many. "You've destroyed us all." "No," I replied, watching as she was pulled inexorably toward the swirling vortex of the broken mirror. "I freed you." The pull intensified, and Mrs. Abernathy's form elongated, stretched, and then collapsed into the broken mirror with a final, piercing wail. One by one, the other watchers followed, their ethereal bodies drawn into the shards of glass until none remained. In the sudden silence that followed, I stood amidst the devastation, trembling but alive, wholly, completely alive. The front door swung open on its own, the morning sunlight spilling in. Freedom, escape. I could leave now, but as I moved toward the door, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of the larger shards of the broken mirror, and for just a moment, so brief I could almost convince myself I imagined it, my eyes gleamed with the same bright, hungry light as the watchers. I left Millfield that day and never returned. I broke my lease, abandoned my job, and drove back to Chicago without looking back. I told myself it was over, that I had escaped, that the nightmare was behind me. But sometimes, in moments of transition, twilight turning to night, wakefulness giving way to sleep, I feel them watching. And sometimes, when I look away from a room and look back, I notice small changes. A book that wasn't there before, a shadow that lingers too long, a reflection that moves independently of its source. And I wonder, did I really defeat the Watchers that day? Or did I simply become one of them? So let me ask you again. Look around your room, notice every detail. Now close your eyes for 10 seconds. Open them. Is everything exactly as it was? Are you absolutely certain? Because I'm watching. And I'm not the only one. Underscore, 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 underscore. If this story sent shivers down your spine, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to hear more tales that blur the line between reality and nightmare. Share your own experiences with strange rooms or unexplainable changes in the comments below. And ask yourself, have you ever noticed something changing when you weren't looking? I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, sleep tight, and maybe keep one eye open. Story number 4. Hey there, fellow night owls and mystery seekers. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I want to thank you all for making this channel grow so quickly. If you're new here, you're in for a treat. These stories are designed to give you those perfect shivers while you drift off to sleep. The comments from last week's video were incredible. So many of you sharing your own forest encounters. I'm curious, have any of you ever felt like something was watching you in the woods? Drop your experiences in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, remember to subscribe for weekly nighttime stories that dance on the edge of your dreams. Now, let's begin our journey into the darkness. Close your eyes if you dare, and let me take you somewhere you might not want to go. The story begins. I've always believed that forests hold secrets, the kind that whisper on autumn winds and hide between ancient tree roots. The kind that our ancestors warned us about in stories meant to keep us safe. But we modern folks have forgotten how to listen. I was about to learn this lesson the hard way, in the Adirondack wilderness of upstate New York, where the trees grow tall enough to block out the sky, and where ancient things still roam when winter approaches. My grandfather used to tell me stories about these woods, stories that made my mother roll her eyes and my father change the subject. "The forest remembers what we try to forget," he'd say in that gravelly voice, weathered by decades of Marlboros and whiskey. "It holds on to the old ways, the old beings, especially when the leaves turn and the air gets that special kind of cold." As kids, we'd laugh at his superstitions, and how he'd leave small offerings of food at the edge of the woods behind his cabin. It seemed so silly then, so outdated, like something from another century entirely. Now, I'd give anything to have listened more carefully, to have asked more questions while he was still alive. My name is Daniel Wheeler, and I'm going to tell you about the week that changed everything I thought I knew about the world, about hunger, and about what happens when you wander too far from the path. It started simple enough. A 7-day solo hiking trip to clear my head after my divorce was finalized. Sarah had taken the house in Rochester, the car, and most of our friends. All I had left was my hiking gear, my job as a high school history teacher that I could return to after break, and a desperate need to feel something other than failure. October in the Adirondacks, the perfect time to disappear for a while. The leaves were burning gold and crimson. The air had that perfect, crisp edge that makes your lungs feel clean again. I parked my rented car at the North Trail Lodge, signed the hiking registry with my planned route and expected return date, shouldered my pack, and headed into the trees. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The methodical rhythm of hiking, the simplicity of focusing only on the next step, the next meal, the next campsite. My muscles ached in that satisfying way that pushes mental pain aside. The world reduced to just me and the wilderness. I made good time, covering almost 18 miles by the end of day 2, which put me deeper into the backcountry than I had initially planned. That night, I set up camp near a small stream, built a careful fire, and watched the stars appear between the swaying branches overhead. That was the last normal night. In the morning, I woke to a strange silence. If you've spent any time in forests, you know they're never truly quiet. There's always bird calls, rustling leaves, the skitter of small animals. But that morning, nothing. Just the soft gurgle of the stream and my own breathing. Probably just a predator passing through the area, I said aloud, trying to convince myself as much as anything. My voice sounded wrong somehow, too loud against the unnatural quiet. I packed quickly, eager to move on. By midday, the forest sounds had returned, but something still felt off. I couldn't place it exactly, just a nagging sensation at the base of my skull, like when you feel someone watching you in a crowded room. I checked my map and decided to push toward Blackwater Ridge. There was supposed to be a spectacular view from the top, and a designated camping area. The trail grew steeper, narrower, less maintained than the main paths, but my GPS confirmed I was on track. So I kept climbing. That's when I found the first strange thing, a deer carcass, just off the trail, not unusual in itself. Deer die in the woods all the time, but this one was wrong. It had been opened from sternum to pelvis, but no organs remained inside. No sign of feeding, just emptiness, no blood on the ground either, as if it had been drained elsewhere and placed here deliberately. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October air. I took a few quick photos with my phone, not sure why. Maybe to show the park rangers later, maybe to prove to myself later that I'd really seen it. I should have turned back then. Any reasonable person would have. But I'd spent the last year being told I wasn't enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't decisive enough. So I kept going, straight up the mountain, straight toward what was waiting. By late afternoon, I reached Blackwater Ridge. The view was everything the guidebooks promised. Miles of unbroken forest in every direction. a vast ocean of trees touched by autumn's fiery hand. I set up camp at the designated site about 50 yards back from the cliff edge, in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. As the sun set, the temperature dropped fast. I built my fire bigger than usual, craving its light as much as its warmth. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound that still haunts my dreams. It wasn't quite a howl, not quite a scream, something in between. Something that felt ancient and hungry and wrong. It echoed across the valley below, bouncing between mountain peaks until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I told myself it was just a coyote or maybe a fox. They can make ungodly sounds that seem almost human. But deep down, I knew better. No natural animal made that sound. I added more wood to the fire, checked that my hunting knife was within reach, and crawled into my tent. Sleep came eventually, but it was thin and troubled, filled with the dreams of being hunted through endless trees. The next morning dawned gray and cold. A low mist hung between the trees, turning the forest into something from a fairy tale. Not the Disney kind, the old kind, where children wander into the woods and never return. I woke with my sleeping bag damp with sweat despite the chill. My dreams had been chaotic and dark, filled with the sensation of being pursued through endless forest corridors. In one particularly vivid moment, I'd found myself staring into a mirror, watching as my own reflection grew gaunt, hollow-eyed, hungry, until it wasn't me at all, but something wearing my face like an ill-fitting mask. Just stress, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. Just the divorce and everything else. As I made my instant coffee over a small morning fire, I tried to recapture that sense of peace I'd felt on the first days of the hike, but something had changed, not just around me, but inside me too. I felt watched. The silence from yesterday had given way to normal forest sounds, but they felt performative somehow, as if the forest was trying too hard to seem ordinary. That's when I found the second strange thing. Tracks in the soft earth around my campsite. They looked almost like human footprints, but too long, too narrow, with impressions at the toes that suggested claws rather than nails. They circled my entire camp, never coming closer than about 20 feet from where I'd slept, as if something had been pacing, watching, waiting. I knelt to examine one of the clearer prints. My finger hovered over the strange impression, not quite willing to touch it. The print was deep. Whatever made it was heavy, but there was something off about the weight distribution. It walked on two legs, certainly, but not like a human. More like a human pretending to be something else, or something else pretending to be human. My hands shook as I packed up my gear. I no longer cared about completing my planned route. I just wanted to get back to civilization. Back to fluorescent lights and car horns and all the annoying sounds of humanity that suddenly seemed so precious. I decided to take the most direct route down from the ridge. It would be steeper than the way I came up, but should connect with the main trail system by nightfall if I moved quickly. I'd gone perhaps 2 miles when I realized I was being followed. It wasn't anything I could see or hear exactly, just that same crawling sensation at the back of my neck. The certainty that eyes were watching from between the trees. Occasionally, I would catch movement in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there but swaying branches. By midday, the mist had thickened rather than burned off. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet in any direction. The forest felt close, oppressive, as if the trees themselves were pressing in. The GPS on my phone still worked, so I kept heading southeast, following the little blue dot that promised safety eventually. That's when I found the third strange thing. A crude structure made of branches, twisted together in complex patterns that seemed both random and deliberate. It stood about 7 feet tall in the middle of what appeared to be a game trail, like a doorway to nowhere. Hanging from the center were small bundles of leaves, feathers, and what looked disturbingly like human teeth. I stood frozen, staring at this impossible thing, this thing that shouldn't exist on a public hiking trail in New York State in the 21st century. It felt old. Not old like something made last season, but old like something from a time when different rules applied to the world. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "Is someone there?" Nothing answered, but the quality of the silence changed. It felt anticipatory, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I skirted wide around the structure, refusing to pass under it, and continued downhill at a faster pace, no longer even trying to be quiet. I wanted whatever was following me to know I was leaving, that I meant no harm, that I was going away. The light began to fade far earlier than it should have, the mist seeming to swallow the sun before it had properly set. I knew I wouldn't reach the main trail before dark. I needed to find a defensible place to camp, somewhere with visibility, somewhere I could put my back against something solid. I found a rock outcropping that formed a small overhang, enough to shelter my tent from above. I cleared the ground, set up camp, and built the biggest fire I could manage with the damp wood available. As full darkness fell, I heard that sound again, that not quite human howl. Much closer this time. I pulled out my phone to check for signal. Still nothing. But I opened the voice recorder app and left it running, partly to document what was happening, partly to have some proof if I didn't make it back to tell anyone. "This is Daniel Wheeler," I spoke quietly into the phone. "I'm on day 4 of a hike in the Adirondacks. Coordinates 44.1, I can't remember exactly. It's on my GPS. Something is out here with me. I don't think it's human. If anyone finds this..." I trailed off, not sure what else to say. "If anyone finds this" was too final. Too much, like giving up. I wasn't ready to accept that this might be the end of my story. The night grew colder. The fire popped and hissed, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. I kept thinking I saw a tall, emaciated figure at the edge of the light, but each time I looked directly, there was nothing. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking to absolute stillness. The fire had burned down to embers that gave almost no light. The air felt different, heavy with anticipation. My watch read 3:17 a.m. My father used to say that 3 a.m. was the devil's hour, the time when the veil between worlds is thinnest. I never believed such things, until that moment when every cell in my body seemed to vibrate with the certainty that I was not alone. The temperature had dropped drastically. Each breath crystallized in front of my face. The darkness pressed against my eyes like a physical weight, broken only by those faintly glowing embers. And there, just at the edge where the light faded entirely into shadow, something was standing just beyond the dying firelight. I could make out its silhouette, impossibly tall and thin, at least 8 feet, but hunched as if it had trouble fitting beneath the canopy of the forest. Its limbs were too long, its head crowned with what looked like branches but moved like antlers. It swayed slightly, as if standing still required effort. I lay perfectly motionless in my sleeping bag, not even daring to breathe. Some primal part of my brain recognized this thing, knew it from our most ancient memories, knew that to move was to die. It took a step forward, into the faint circle of light cast by the embers. I saw its skin then, pulled tight over a frame that was clearly once human but had been stretched, transformed. Patches of mangy fur clung to its chest and shoulders. Its fingers ended in long yellowed claws, but it was the face that froze my blood. A human face, partly, but elongated into a deer-like muzzle filled with too many teeth. The eyes were black pools that reflected the firelight like an animal's, but with a terrible intelligence behind them. It opened its mouth, wider than any human mouth should go, and I smelled the rot of its breath from 10 feet away. It sniffed the air, turning that horrible head toward my tent. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but directly into my mind. Hungry, so hungry, the words weren't sounds but feelings. Impressions of starvation so intense that my own stomach cramped in sympathetic pain. Images flashed through my mind, of running through the forest, of pursuing prey, of the euphoria of feeding, followed by the agony of hunger that could never be satisfied. I must have made some small sound, a whimper of fear I couldn't suppress. The creature's head snapped toward me with unnatural speed, those black eyes fixing on the exact spot where I lay. You! Hear me! Feel me! Another wave of impressions hit me. This time, memories that weren't mine. A human hunter lost in a brutal winter. Starvation. A terrible choice to consume forbidden flesh. Transformation. Centuries of hunger and isolation and hatred for what he had become. The Wendigo. The name rose from some half-remembered lecture on Algonquian folklore. The cursed being created when a human resorts to cannibalism. Cursed with eternal hunger that grows with each feeding. Cursed to gradually lose their humanity until only the hunger remains. It took another step toward me. Close enough now that I could see the rags of what might once have been clothing hanging from its emaciated frame. You will understand. I knew with certainty that it planned to do more than kill me. It would make me like itself, force me to feel its hunger, to become a vessel for this ancient curse. Something snapped in me. The paralysis of fear replaced by desperate survival instinct. I lunged for my backpack, for the emergency flare gun I kept in the side pocket. The Wendigo let out that terrible scream howl and moved with impossible speed, covering the distance between us in a heartbeat. I felt its claws tear through the tent fabric, felt the cold air rush in. I grabbed the flare gun and rolled, narrowly avoiding those grasping hands. Without aiming, I fired directly at the creature's chest. The night exploded into brilliant red light. The Wendigo shrieked, more in rage than pain, but it stumbled backward away from the burning magnesium. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my phone and knife and ran, abandoning everything else. I crashed through the underbrush, my only goal to put distance between myself and that thing. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. I had no light, no trail, just blind panic driving me downhill, always downhill, toward where I hoped civilization waited. Behind me, that howl rose again. The sound of something hungry giving chase. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs trembled with exhaustion. When I finally had to stop, I found myself in a small clearing. The mist had cleared enough to show a sky full of stars and a waning moon that provided just enough light to see. I couldn't hear anything pursuing me, but that meant nothing. The Wendigo moved like silence itself when it wanted to. I needed a plan beyond just running blindly through the dark forest. That's when I remembered something from those same folklore lectures. Wendigos were creatures of winter and starvation. They were repelled by fire, by symbols of life and abundance. The flare had driven it back, not because it feared the fire itself, but because of what the fire represented. I gathered what dry material I could find by moonlight, built a small fire with shaking hands, and waited. My phone showed it was nearly 5 a.m. Dawn would come eventually. I just needed to survive until then. The temperature continued to drop. My breath clouded in front of me. Without my gear, I was dangerously exposed to the elements. Hypothermia would kill me as surely as the Wendigo if I couldn't stay warm. I fed the small fire carefully, keeping it alive with the limited fuel I could gather without straying too far from its light. As the eastern sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly, I heard sounds from the forest around me. Not the Wendigo's howl, but something almost worse. Whispers. Dozens of whispered voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. They seemed to come from all directions at once, sometimes sounding like pleas for help, sometimes like warnings, sometimes like my own voice calling out. They're not real, I told myself firmly. It's trying to lure you away from the fire. The voices grew more insistent as the sky lightened, more recognizable. I heard Sarah calling my name, heard my father who had passed away 3 years earlier, heard friends and colleagues and students all begging for help just beyond the firelight. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices continued. They were in my head, just like the Wendigo's thoughts had been. It was trying to get into my mind, to make me leave my small circle of safety, just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer. The first true ray of sunlight broke through the trees. The voices stopped as suddenly as they had begun. I waited, hardly daring to hope, as full dawn slowly illuminated the forest around me. In the growing light, I could see I was much closer to the valley floor than I had realized. Perhaps only a mile or two from the main trail. I had run farther than seemed possible in my blind panic. I let my fire burn down, no longer needing its protection with the sun rising. My body ached from cold and exertion, my face and hands scratched and bleeding from my headlong flight through the forest. But I was alive. I started walking again, following the sunlight east and downhill. Within an hour, I intersected a marked trail that my phone confirmed would lead back to the North Trail Lodge. I allowed myself to believe I might actually survive this nightmare. That's when I found the fourth and final strange thing. Carved into the trunk of a massive old pine tree beside the trail, fresh enough that sap still oozed from the cuts, was a message. Winter comes. I wait. Hunger never ends. Below the words was a crude symbol that resembled antlers rising from a human skull. I took a photo with shaking hands, then practically ran the remaining 5 miles back to the lodge. The staff were shocked at my appearance, at my story of losing my gear in a fall. I didn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? But as I waited for the taxi that would take me back to civilization, the oldest staff member, a leathery man named Jim who looked like he'd spent his entire life in these mountains, sat beside me on the porch. "Found something out there you didn't expect, didn't you?" he said quietly. Not really a question. I looked at him, wondering how much to say, how much he might already know. His eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, but held a depth of knowledge that made me shiver despite the warm sunlight on the porch. "I don't know what you mean," I tried, voice hoarse from dehydration and screaming. Jim laughed, a dry sound like fallen leaves skittering across pavement. "Your eyes say different. They've got the look of someone who's seen beyond the edge of the world we pretend is the only one." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn smooth by years of handling. "My grandmother was Abenaki. Taught me things that don't make it into the trail guides." He opened the pouch and I caught the scent of herbs I couldn't identify. "These mountains have belonged to her people long before they had English names. The old-timers here have a saying," he continued when I didn't respond. "When the Wendigo walks, keep to the light, keep to company, keep food always in abundance. The curse only takes the isolated, the hungry in body and spirit." He knew, somehow, he knew exactly what I'd encountered. "It's real?" I whispered, still half hoping he would laugh and tell me it was just a local legend meant to scare tourists. As real as this porch we're sitting on, he nodded. Not many see it and live to tell about it. It usually only appears to those it wants, those who resonate with its hunger somehow. What does that mean? I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. It means you were carrying a hunger inside you. A different kind than its, but hunger all the same. Emptiness calling to emptiness. He looked at me with kind but knowing eyes. You came to these woods trying to escape something, trying to fill something. I thought about my divorce, about the emptiness my life had become, about how isolated I'd allowed myself to become even before this trip. Will it come for me again? The question that had been haunting me since dawn finally found voice. Jim was quiet for a long moment. That depends on you, on whether you feed that emptiness inside or fill it with something better. The Wendigo is always hunting, but it can only find those who make themselves into proper prey. The taxi arrived before I could ask more questions, and part of me was glad. I wasn't ready for answers that might be worse than uncertainty. That was 3 months ago. I returned to my teaching job, reconnected with friends I'd been avoiding, even started talking to Sarah again. Not to rekindle anything, but to find proper closure. I've been volunteering at a local food bank. Something about fighting physical hunger in others helps quiet the metaphorical hunger in myself. But I still wake sometimes in the night, thinking I hear that terrible howl echoing between buildings instead of mountains. I find myself checking my reflection more carefully, watching for signs of hollowing cheeks or too sharp teeth. The dreams continue, of running through endless woods, of hunger so deep it becomes an identity rather than a feeling. I went to a therapist for a while, trying to process what happened as trauma rather than supernatural encounter. The mind creates metaphors to help us understand difficult experiences, she said with professional certainty. I nodded and agreed and never went back after the 3rd session. Some things can't be processed away. Some truths don't fit into the neat boxes of modern psychology. I know what I saw, what I felt, what spoke into my mind with thoughts that weren't my own. When winter came and the first snow fell, I found something outside my apartment door one morning, carefully placed against the threshold like a calling card or a warning, a small bundle of twigs and feathers, with a single yellowed tooth in the center. Beneath it, scratched into the wood of my doorframe in letters so small I almost missed them. Hunger never ends. I moved the next day, to Arizona, as far from northern forests as I could manage. I tell myself it's for the job opportunity, for the change of scene, for the year-round warmth. But on cold desert nights when the wind makes sounds almost like words, I know the real reason I'm running, still running, and wondering if distance is enough to escape something that lives as much in my mind as in those dark Adirondack woods. If you're ever in the woods, and the forest falls unnaturally silent, if you feel eyes watching from between the trees, if you see a structure of branches that looks like a doorway to nowhere, turn back, walk quickly, but don't run. Return to light and warmth and the company of other humans, for the Wendigo walks in lonely places, and its hunger is eternal. And sometimes, it finds a hunger in us that matches its own. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story, my friends. I hope it gave you that perfect blend of cozy fear as you drift toward sleep. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads. I'm curious, what would you have done if you encountered the Wendigo? Would you have run like Daniel or tried something different? Let me know in the comments below. And before you go, many of you have been asking about the strange symbols that appear for just a frame or two in my videos. Keep your eyes open. There might be one in this video too. The first person to spot it and describe it in the comments gets a special shout out in next week's story. Sleep tight and remember, hunger takes many forms, but it never has to consume you completely.